The Pacific Ocean looked indifferent that morning. Waves lashed against the rocks, white foam crashing in relentless rhythm, as if the sea itself were daring anyone to survive. At the training grounds of the United States Navy SEALs in Coronado, California, recruits were already waist-deep in freezing surf, their bodies trembling in the dark chill of pre-dawn. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the air was filled with a sharp, salty bite. This was the beginning of Hell Week, 5 days designed to break men, to see who could endure and who would quit. Among the cluster of drenched, shivering men stood Ethan Cole, the youngest candidate in the class. He was lean, wiry, quiet, almost invisible in comparison to the towering, broad-shouldered men around him. His uniform stuck to his skin like a second layer of ice. His face was calm, controlled, betraying none of the fear and exhaustion that seemed to infect the rest of the recruits. The others had already begun their cruel assessments, mocking, laughing, testing the newcomer's patience. A large recruit, his chest heaving with cold-induced shivers, looked at Ethan and barked a derisive laugh. "No chance, rookie," he spat. The words were meant to humiliate, to make him break under the weight of ridicule. Some men laughed along. Some simply shook their heads, accepting the inevitable. Another recruit would fail here like so many before him. The instructors were silent observers, tall and imposing, their eyes scanning every movement, every flinch. They had seen countless rookies arrive with fire in their eyes, only to collapse into the sand or the surf, crying, whining, begging to quit. This wasn't a test of courage, they knew. It was a test of endurance, resilience, and mental control. They didn't care about strength or size. They cared about who could survive the ice, the pain, and the constant, crushing pressure. Hours passed like days. The recruits were forced to wade deeper into the churning water, their legs burning, their teeth chattering, every muscle screaming for relief. Waves slammed against their torsos, pushed them down, tossed them like rag dolls, and pulled them back up. They screamed. They gasped. Some collapsed and were immediately dragged to the shore, their training over before it had begun. Ethan did none of that. He stayed upright. He let the cold bite, let the waves slam into him, let the exhaustion gnaw at his bones. He focused on his breathing, each inhale slow and deliberate, each exhale steady. He allowed the water to move around him without resistance. He had been taught years ago in a small dojo far from any ocean to master his body, to master his mind. Pain was temporary. Panic was optional. Weakness was a choice. The instructors noticed him, as they always did when someone didn't break. They approached silently, imposing even without a word. One of them leaned close, his face grim, expecting the telltale flinch or desperate plea for mercy. But Ethan didn't move. His eyes, steady and calm, met the instructor's gaze without fear. The instructor straightened, a flicker of something unusual passing over his expression: respect, curiosity, maybe even a trace of unease. By mid-morning, most of the recruits had rung the bell at least once. Each toll of the bell marked a failure, an admission of weakness, a surrender to the ocean's cold and the training staff's unrelenting pressure. Ethan had not rung it once. The waves continued to pound him, but he remained still, shoulders squared, gaze forward, muscles tight but not trembling. A particularly cruel drill came next. The team had to sprint into chest-deep water, dive beneath, swim out to a marker, and then dash back against the crashing surf. Those who failed were immediately flung into further punishment: push-ups, endless runs, or simply thrown back into the icy water until their bodies shook uncontrollably. When Ethan's turn came, the larger men laughed, jeered, and pushed him toward the starting line. "No chance, rookie," one muttered under his breath, echoing the words from earlier. The phrase, meant as insult and prophecy, bounced off the waves and back into the cold air. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Every eye in the vicinity followed his lean frame as he plunged into the ocean. The first wave hit him with the force of a battering ram. It slammed him down, spun him around, tried to throw him off balance. He surfaced, coughing, shivering, but steady. The next wave came, even higher, colder. He dove under, arms slicing through the water, legs kicking with precise rhythm. The world became a blur of salt, water, and pain. He felt the sting, yes, but he did not falter. Every movement was deliberate. Every breath was controlled. By the time he returned to the shore, the others were gasping, exhausted, defeated. Some were sobbing quietly. Mac, the largest man in the group and self-appointed critic of the rookies, looked at Ethan with a mix of disbelief and growing respect. The words "no chance, rookie" had lost their sting. They no longer applied. Ethan stepped onto the sand, muscles trembling from cold but mind as clear as a calm lake. His chest rose and fell evenly. He didn't celebrate. He didn't brag. He simply walked past the others, leaving a quiet statement. Endurance isn't measured in words. It's measured in actions, in silence, in the ability to remain standing when the world tries to break you. The instructors didn't speak, but they nodded subtly to one another. They had seen the spark, the rare, quiet fire that separates a recruit who survives from one who fails. This was no ordinary rookie. Something about him unnerved even them, and they would be watching him more closely from now on. As the sun finally crested the horizon, casting gold across the cold, frothing ocean, Ethan stood on the beach, staring out at the waves. The water had tested him, mocked him, tried to break him, and he had endured, alone, silent, and undefeated in that moment. Somewhere behind him, someone muttered again, almost reverently, "No chance, maybe not." Ethan didn't turn. He didn't need to. The ocean didn't care about excuses, and neither did he. Hell Week was not just training. It was a crucible designed to separate the boys from men, the weak from the unstoppable. The recruits staggered along the sand, muscles screaming, lungs burning, eyes stinging with salt water and exhaustion. No sleep for days. Every step, every breath, every motion demanded more than the human body seemed capable of giving. The sun hadn't yet claimed the sky, but fatigue already weighed like armor on every man. Ethan Cole, still standing, moved with a quiet rhythm. Every muscle, every joint, every sinew obeyed him without complaint. The larger men stumbled around him, shaking with the effort to stay upright, while instructors barked orders, blows, and insults in a non-stop barrage. "Keep moving. No excuses," one shouted. "You think the ocean cares about whining? Move." Among them, Tyler "Mac" McKenna, a former college wrestler and one of the strongest in the class, paced like a predator. He eyed Ethan with skepticism. "The quiet rookie won't last," he muttered to no one in particular. The other recruits nodded nervously, still panting from the previous drill, but Mac's words carried weight. He had survived 2 years in SEAL training and thought he knew all there was to know about toughness. The exercise changed when a midnight surf drill went wrong. The team had to launch a small boat into the pounding waves, navigate it through the surf, and return to shore. It was a test of endurance, balance, and teamwork. The ocean, as always, had other plans. A massive wall of water, taller than a man, slammed into their boat. It flipped violently, tossing recruits into the frigid night water. Screams erupted, hands flailed. One recruit vanished beneath the waves, dragged under by the power of the sea. Panic swept the team like wildfire. Mac shouted orders, but the chaos was immediate, total. Men clawed at each other and at the boat, desperate to survive the violent motion. The ocean didn't care about rank, size, or fear. It didn't care about excuses. Ethan didn't panic. He dove into the black water. Cold surged through him like fire, but he welcomed it. Instinct and training took over. His eyes scanned for the struggling man, his body cutting through the waves with precise, efficient movements. Minutes stretched as seconds. The current tried to twist him, but he stayed on target, his breathing steady, calm, controlled. Years of martial arts training, years of silent discipline, years of mental preparation had prepared him for this. Finally, he found the recruit trapped under a flipped section of the boat, straps cutting into his chest. Without hesitation, Ethan reached down, slipped a hand under the man's arm, twisted, and freed him. Another moment in the ocean's fury, and both broke the surface, gasping, coughing, water streaming from their mouths and noses. Back on shore, the rescued recruit clung to Ethan like he had found an anchor in the storm. Mac arrived, drenched and furious, but the words he had planned didn't come. His gaze lingered on Ethan, calculating. This quiet, lean rookie had moved faster, thought faster, acted faster than anyone else in the team. Fear and respect mixed uneasily in Mac's expression. The instructors didn't smile. They didn't congratulate. They didn't need to. They simply nodded to one another. They had seen the spark that separates men who survive from men who fail. Ethan had endured what nearly all others could not. He had mastered the first law of SEAL training: remain standing when the world tries to break you. Hell Week pressed on. The days blurred together. Endless runs along the sand, log carries that left shoulders screaming, mud drills that coated skin with grime, and countless exercises designed to crush the spirit as much as the body. Sleep was a memory. Hunger gnawed at their insides. The ocean, the sand, the instructors, all relentless, all indifferent. Through it all, Ethan remained a steady rhythm in the storm. When other recruits whimpered, he moved with purpose. When muscles screamed and lungs burned, he maintained control. Mac continued to watch him with a mixture of suspicion and growing admiration. The rookie was no longer just a liability to be mocked. He was a force no one had yet understood. The ultimate test came near the end of Hell Week, a 20-mile march through sand and surf, carrying a full pack, weapons, and the weight of exhaustion itself. Recruits staggered, some collapsing midway, some refusing to move, forced to the sidelines. Mac's team, which had once laughed at Ethan, found themselves relying on him in small ways, following his pace, taking his cues, and noticing how he seemed impervious to the cold, the fatigue, the pain. Hours later, after the sun had risen high, Mac turned to Ethan for the first time without a word. He didn't need to speak. The quiet understanding passed between them. This rookie had survived. Not because of strength, not because of size, not because of luck, but because of mastery. Mastery over body, mind, and fear. That night, exhausted recruits collapsed into the sand, the ocean still roaring behind them. The bell rang, signaling yet another day survived. For most, it was relief. For Ethan, it was just another test, another moment to endure. But even he allowed himself a small thought as he stared at the stars reflecting on the water. He had proven something tonight, something unspoken. The other recruits whispered again, almost in awe now, no chance, maybe not. Ethan didn't respond. He never needed to. His silence, his endurance, and his calm spoke louder than any words ever could. By the end of Hell Week, only a fraction of the original class remained. Those who had laughed at him now gave him space, some with fear, some with respect, all with curiosity. The instructors took note. A new type of warrior had emerged from the waves, a quiet rookie with a fire that burned beneath control. And somewhere in the surf, Ethan understood what he already knew. Surviving the ocean was nothing compared to surviving the world of combat he was about to face. Hell Week had tested the body. The real challenge would test the soul. The sun had barely risen over the jagged mountains of Afghanistan when Ethan Cole and his SEAL team touched down on the rocky terrain. Dust and heat replaced the cold of Coronado, but the challenge was just as merciless. This was no drill. This was real combat, and every heartbeat carried the weight of life or death. Their mission: a high-value insurgent compound rumored to house leaders responsible for countless American and Allied casualties. Ethan had earned his trident, but the battlefield was different from Hell Week. Waves of gunfire replaced waves of the Pacific. Explosions shattered the morning silence. Dust and smoke clouded vision. The adrenaline burned hotter than any training session could simulate. Their team moved cautiously along the narrow canyon, rifles raised, eyes scanning for movement. Each step had to be deliberate. One wrong move could trigger IEDs hidden beneath the dusty ground. The enemy wasn't just armed. They were desperate, clever, and familiar with every rock, ridge, and shadow. Ethan's heartbeat slowed despite the chaos. Years of discipline, of silent control, had prepared him for this. He focused on what he could control: breathing, positioning, observation. Panic had no place here. Hesitation meant death. Inside the compound, the first ambush hit. Gunfire erupted from all sides. The walls were lined with insurgents, firing from narrow doorways and windows. One of the men in front of Ethan froze, exposed. Another insurgent lunged directly at him from arm's length. There was no room to aim, no time for a rifle shot. Ethan's training kicked in. Muscle memory, learned in years of martial arts and reinforced under SEAL instruction, guided him. He sidestepped the first strike, redirected the insurgent's momentum, and with a controlled elbow strike sent him crashing into the wall. The second attacker rushed, weapons raised. Ethan's hand caught the rifle, twisted it with perfect leverage, disarming the man without losing balance. The insurgent fell unconscious with a precise strike to the temple. The hallway was a blur of motion, but to Ethan it was stillness, controlled, silent, lethal. Seconds felt like minutes. By the time the rest of his team arrived, the corridor was quiet. 3 insurgents lay unconscious, and Ethan stood, untouched and calm, eyes scanning, ready for the next threat. No one spoke immediately. The team had trained for months, seen countless drills, and yet none had moved with such precision under real fire. Mac finally broke the silence, disbelief in his voice. Where did that come from? Ethan simply reloaded his weapon. Practice, he said quietly, not even allowing a hint of pride. The remainder of the mission pushed the team further into the compound. Each room brought new resistance, but the team followed Ethan's lead, consciously or unconsciously, respecting his quiet authority. He didn't give orders beyond necessity. His presence was enough. The firefight escalated as they moved deeper into the compound. Insurgents fired from above staircases, from narrow windows. Bullets whipped past walls and ceilings. Explosions shook floors. Recruits ducked and fired blindly, adrenaline making hands shake. But Ethan remained focused. Every movement was deliberate, each action efficient. A grenade went off nearby. Dust filled the air. A teammate, caught off guard, stumbled. Ethan reached him instantly, pulling him behind cover, checking his condition with one hand while still scanning for threats. There was no hesitation, no panic, just control. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Finally, the team reached the target room, a small, dimly lit chamber where a high-ranking insurgent commander had been hiding. He raised his weapon as they entered, desperate, reckless. Ethan's movement was instantaneous. A precise strike disarmed him. He was subdued before he could pull the trigger. By the time the team exited the compound, the sun was high overhead, casting sharp shadows on the dusty landscape. Afghan villagers peered from a distance, watching the strange efficiency of the Americans. Inside the team, silence dominated. They were alive, whole, and successful. But the tension, the fear, and the intensity still clung like sweat to their skin. Later, around the helicopter, Mac approached Ethan. He didn't shake his hand, didn't smile, didn't offer a word of praise. He just nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the rookie had proven something none of them had expected. Ethan didn't look at him. He checked weapons, reloaded, and scanned the terrain. Every operation required focus. Victory was never permanent and survival was never guaranteed. In the quiet moments after the chaos, Ethan allowed himself a small thought. He remembered the dojo where he had learned restraint and control. The lessons Master Hiro Tanaka had drilled into him echoed in his mind. Strike only when silence is required. Control the chaos. Preserve life where possible. Victory is measured by precision, not brutality. This mission was the first test of that philosophy in combat, and he had passed. But the war was far from over. Each firefight, each mission, would test him in ways the ocean and Hell Week could never. The rookie who had survived waves and pain had now survived bullets and fire. And somewhere, deep inside him, he understood. He had not only earned the respect of his team, he had also discovered the real measure of his own strength. Strength, he realized, was not just muscle or skill, it was control, discipline, silence. And in a world filled with chaos and death, those who mastered silence were the deadliest of all. The helicopter lifted them from the mountains, dust and wind whipping past their faces. Ethan sat quietly, looking down at the rocky terrain disappearing below. His hands were steady. His mind was calm. His body was exhausted, yes, but unbroken. The first real fight had been survived. And the rookie was no longer just a rookie. The Afghan sun blazed over the compound ruins, illuminating the harsh, rocky terrain with merciless intensity. Ethan Cole sat behind a crumbling wall, rifle resting loosely in his lap, but his attention was elsewhere. The firefight from the previous mission had ended hours ago, yet his mind was still alert, calculating, analyzing. Every action, every movement, every decision replayed like a lesson. He had survived bullets, explosions, and close-quarters combat, but the lessons from his past were louder than the gunfire. Flashbacks hit him without warning. He was back in the quiet, dimly lit dojo where Master Hiro Tanaka had first taught him to strike and restrain. The smell of polished wood mingled with incense, the air thick with discipline and silence. "Control your breath, control your body, control your mind," Tanaka's voice echoed. "Strike only when silence is required. Never let anger guide you." Ethan remembered the way his hands had moved, the precision, the flow of energy, the discipline. Each motion a lesson in life and survival. Years later, the dojo was a memory, but its principles lived inside him. In Afghanistan, amid gunfire and chaos, they were more vital than ever. While the rookie recruits panicked under pressure and even seasoned SEALs faltered, Ethan moved with deliberate focus. Every breath measured, every action precise. Where others saw threats, he calculated solutions. Where others saw chaos, he saw opportunity. The mission had been successful, yet victory was a fleeting illusion here. Lives were always at risk. Civilians and combatants alike shared the same unforgiving terrain. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him, more than the physical exhaustion that clawed at his muscles. This wasn't just a fight against men with rifles. It was a fight to control the outcome, to ensure his team survived intact, and to ensure his actions didn't unnecessarily cost lives. Mac approached him quietly, boots crunching against gravel. He had a new respect for the rookie, though he would never admit it out loud. "You keep your head in there," Mac said, nodding at the compound's maze-like interior. "Most guys freeze. You don't." Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. Words were unnecessary. The lesson of silence and control wasn't just for enemies, it was for allies too, for himself. Survival depended on it. Later, as the team set up a temporary observation post on a ridge overlooking a nearby village, Ethan allowed himself a moment to breathe. His mind wandered to the boy he had been, training under Tanaka, learning discipline in a world far removed from war. The contrast was staggering. One life full of controlled movements, quiet reflection, and measured strikes. The other full of chaos, violence, and split-second decisions. And yet, the connection was clear. The skills that had seemed abstract or ceremonial were now the difference between life and death. Another SEAL, younger and jittery, watched him from across the ridge. "How do you stay so calm?" the man asked. His voice trembled not just from fear but from awe. Ethan looked at him, expression neutral, and replied quietly, "You focus on what you can control. Everything else, let it go." The young SEAL nodded slowly. There was no easy way to teach calm in combat, but actions spoke louder than words. Ethan's movements, his decisions, his reactions under fire, everything demonstrated mastery of both body and mind. It was a lesson that would stick with them far longer than any drill. Night fell and the desert became a black canvas dotted with stars. The team huddled around a small fire, exhaustion pressing down on them like a heavy cloak. Ethan remained slightly apart, observing, analyzing, meditating. The crackle of flames mirrored the memory of gunfire, the past and present blending seamlessly. He remembered each precise strike, each calculated maneuver, the way his body moved instinctively to protect his team. Every motion reaffirmed Tanaka's teachings. Strike with purpose, strike without malice, and always leave the world intact when you can. Sleep came fitfully, a half-rest interrupted by the knowledge that tomorrow would be another test. Afghanistan offered no reprieve, no mercy. And Ethan understood that discipline wasn't temporary. It wasn't a skill you turned on and off. It was a constant, living force that had to be maintained, even in the absence of immediate danger. He thought of the team, of Mac, of the recruits who doubted him, and of the civilians in the villages whose lives hung in the balance. Each had a part to play in his calculations, each movement and decision a chain reaction that could ripple across hours, miles, and lives. Ethan's calm wasn't arrogance, it was awareness, a silent acknowledgement that the chaos of war could only be survived with control over oneself and the situation at hand. By dawn, the ridge was quiet. Ethan packed his gear, checked his weapons, and prepared to move with his team into another unknown zone. Every action remained deliberate. His body ached, his muscles protested, yet he moved with the same controlled grace that had guided him through Hell Week and the first firefight. The lessons of the dojo, of the Pacific surf, of survival against all odds, they were now inseparable from the man he had become. As the team descended into the valley below, Ethan's mind was already anticipating the next encounter. He didn't fear it. He respected it. And he knew that in the moments when the world erupted into violence, only the disciplined would survive. Silence, he reminded himself, was more powerful than noise, calm more effective than panic, precision more lethal than brute force, and mastery over oneself was the deadliest weapon of all. The rookie who had survived the ocean and Hell Week was no longer a rookie. The first firefight had proved that. Now, in the unforgiving heat and dust of Afghanistan, Ethan Cole was becoming something else entirely, a SEAL who moved through chaos like a shadow, silent, controlled, and lethal. The war was far from over, but for the first time, he knew that nothing could break him, not bullets, not fire, not fear. Night had fallen over the jagged Afghan mountains, turning the landscape into a shadowed maze of rock and dust. Ethan Cole moved silently with his SEAL platoon, boots barely making a sound on the cold stone. Their mission was high stakes, a fortified insurgent compound deep in hostile territory, housing a cell responsible for multiple American casualties. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. One wrong move could ignite a firefight that would cost lives, SEALs and civilians alike. The insertion went smoothly at first. They rappelled from helicopters under the cloak of darkness, landing on a narrow ridge overlooking the compound. Ethan's eyes scanned the perimeter. Guards were posted along every wall, their rifles trained toward any movement. Intelligence had warned them that the compound was booby-trapped, a maze of narrow corridors, sharp corners, and hidden threats. The team advanced cautiously. Ethan's body moved like water, each motion fluid, silent, precise. He had trained his mind to anticipate danger before it appeared, his reflexes honed through years of martial arts and SEAL drills. Mac, usually loud and commanding, now followed quietly, trusting Ethan's lead. Suddenly, a series of gunshots erupted to the south. A distraction. Ethan barely glanced in that direction, already focused on the narrow corridor ahead. The rest of the team fanned out, clearing rooms, clearing windows, but inside the stone compound, danger was immediate. 3 insurgents emerged from a tight hallway, blocking Ethan's path. One grinned, voice dripping with arrogance. "No chance, rookie," he sneered in broken English, brandishing a rifle. Time slowed. There was no room for firearms. The walls of the corridor were too narrow for aim or maneuvering. Panic could have set in, but Ethan didn't flinch. He remembered his training. Control your body, control your mind, control the chaos around you. The first insurgent lunged, weapon swinging wildly. Ethan sidestepped with perfect balance, redirecting the man's momentum and using a precise strike to the ribs to knock him backward into the wall. The second attacker charged. Ethan caught his wrist mid-swing, twisting and redirecting the rifle while delivering a calculated knee strike to the chest. The man crumpled silently, unable to resist the force. The third insurgent froze for just a second too long enough. Ethan moved like a shadow, elbows, knees, and precise strikes connecting with critical points. Within 10 seconds, all three men lay unconscious, sprawled across the narrow corridor. Not a single shot had been fired, not a single drop of blood beyond minor bruises. When Mac and the rest of the platoon arrived, they stopped dead. Their eyes widened. They had trained for months under intense scenarios, yet none had ever moved with such lethal precision under real combat. Silence filled the corridor, heavy and suffocating. What just happened?" Mac breathed, barely audible. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. His calm, collected presence said more than any words ever could. The phrase "no chance, rookie" hung in the air, but now it had an entirely new meaning. The rookie was no longer a joke. He was a force, silent, deadly, and in complete control. The team continued to clear the compound, moving room by room. Each insurgent met with a combination of tactical precision and martial mastery. Ethan remained at the forefront, not seeking glory, not seeking recognition. His movements were purposeful, efficient, and silent, every step designed to neutralize threats while minimizing harm to anyone not involved in the fight. At one point, a blast of gunfire erupted from a second-floor window. One of the SEALs was caught in the crossfire, stumbling backward. Without hesitation, Ethan vaulted over debris, grabbed the man, and dragged him into cover, simultaneously returning fire with his rifle. Each motion was calculated, precise, and life-saving. The chaos of combat swirled around him, yet he remained composed, like a calm eye in the center of a storm. Hours later, after the compound was secured and the insurgents either neutralized or restrained, the team regrouped outside. The mountains were silent, save for the distant hum of the extraction helicopters approaching. The soldiers were exhausted, their clothes ripped, bodies bruised and bleeding, hearts pounding. Mac approached Ethan once more, shaking his head in disbelief. That was incredible. You saved all of us back there. I don't even know how to describe it." Ethan simply checked his weapon, calm and detached. "We survived. That's what matters," he replied. No hint of pride, no boastful words, just focus, just discipline. The helicopter touched down, kicking up dust and stones. As the team climbed aboard, the legend of the Karate SEAL silently began to spread. The men who had doubted him whispered among themselves, astonished and uneasy. He had taken a phrase meant to mock him, "No chance, rookie," and turned it into proof of his lethal skill, his unshakable discipline, and his mastery over both body and mind. Ethan sat near the edge of the helicopter floor, looking out over the mountains fading into the night. He reflected on his training under Master Tanaka, on every hour spent mastering breath, balance, and motion. Every lesson, every push-up, every run into icy surf had prepared him for this moment. The ocean, Hell Week, and the dojo had all led to this, the first real fight that defined him in the eyes of his team. And yet he didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. The mission was not complete until every team member returned safely, and even then, victory was fragile, temporary. Afghanistan offered no permanent respite, no glory lasting longer than the next engagement. Ethan's mind, already moving ahead, analyzed the next steps. He understood that combat was a cycle of chaos and control. Today, he had maintained control. Tomorrow, the chaos would return, and he would need to be ready. As the helicopter lifted into the night sky, carrying the exhausted team away from the mountains, a faint whisper traveled through the cabin. "No chance, the rookie." The words were hushed, hesitant, tinged with awe. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Silence spoke louder than words. Tonight, he had proven himself not just a survivor of training, but a master of close-quarters combat, a living example of discipline, control, and lethal efficiency. And the rookie who had once been mocked had become a legend in the making. The mountains faded behind them, the dust settled, and the night swallowed the battlefield. But for Ethan Cole, the fight had only just begun. The extraction was chaos incarnate. Dust and smoke filled the canyon, twisting around the team like living specters. The insurgents hadn't surrendered quietly. Gunfire chased them through the narrow paths as the SEALs fought to reach their helicopters. Explosions ripped through the rocks nearby, throwing dirt and stone into the night air. Every step could be their last. Ethan moved first, scanning threats, calculating the safest path. Mac, his usual confident, loud presence, stumbled, clutching his shoulder. A bullet had ripped through his gear, blood darkening the fabric. Panic threatened to ripple through the team, but Ethan's calm presence held them together. He didn't hesitate. "Hold on," he said quietly and lifted Mac into his arms. The man was heavy, his weight almost unbearable, but Ethan's muscles had been trained to endure far worse than human burden. His breathing remained steady as he adjusted his grip, calculating every step, every movement. Bullets shredded the canyon walls around them. The echo of automatic fire ricocheted off the rocks, creating a deadly symphony. One round narrowly missed Ethan's leg, kicking up gravel as it slammed into the cliffside. He didn't falter. Not a flinch, not a stumble, only precision and control. The rest of the team covered their extraction, providing suppressing fire and guiding the wounded toward the narrow path leading to the helicopters. Time stretched and contracted in strange ways. Every second felt like a lifetime, every movement a careful negotiation between survival and momentum. Ethan adjusted Mac's weight, ensuring the injured man's body was stable, his own balance perfect. The canyon floor was uneven, jagged, and treacherous. One misstep could send them tumbling into a rock-strewn death. Yet Ethan navigated it like he had rehearsed 1,000 times, though nothing in training could replicate this combination of exhaustion, adrenaline, and danger. Minutes, or was it hours? Later, the helicopter touched down, rotor blades whipping the dust into a choking cloud. Ethan carried Mac across the landing zone, every motion precise, every step deliberate. Medics swarmed, taking Mac into care, and for the first time, Ethan allowed himself a moment to pause. His arms shook from exertion, his muscles screaming, but he didn't collapse. He remained standing, watching the medics work. Exhaustion was heavy, but there was no relief. The battle wasn't over until everyone was accounted for, every threat neutralized, and the team secured. The helicopter lifted, dust and wind tearing at their faces. Ethan leaned against the cabin wall, silent, observing, thinking. The cost of control was not measured in victory. It was measured in the toll it took on the body and the mind. Hours later, the team reached the field hospital. Mac was stable, but the sight of blood, injuries, and exhaustion weighed heavily on Ethan. He remained outside, away from the noise of the triage, staring at his hands, bruised, trembling, yet unbroken. He had saved lives today, but survival was never clean. Every action left a mark, and every mark was a reminder of the price of mastery. The other SEALs began to talk in low tones, praising one another quietly, still exhausted, still wary of the night outside. Ethan said nothing. He didn't seek recognition. He had done what was necessary. That was enough. Survival, protection, precision, that was his reward. Memories of the dojo returned, and with them, the voice of Master Tanaka. The cost of every strike is measured by responsibility. Control your strength, or it will control you. Ethan felt the weight of those words now more than ever. He had used his strength to save lives, but he understood the fragility of the world he operated in. One mistake could undo all of it. Mac, once a skeptic, finally approached him. His expression was a mixture of exhaustion, gratitude, and respect. I don't know how you did that," he said quietly. "You carried me through hell. No one else could have." Ethan simply nodded. "We survived," he said. Simple, matter of fact, nothing more. Words had no power here, only actions mattered. Night settled over the desert and the helicopters departed, leaving dust clouds and silence in their wake. Ethan walked alone outside the perimeter, feeling the sting of adrenaline fade and the weight of reality press upon him. Victory always came at a cost. He had seen it in blood, in exhaustion, and in the trembling eyes of those who had nearly died. He had learned to bear it silently. The wind picked up, carrying the dust and the echoes of the battle. Ethan's mind replayed every decision, every step, every strike. Every movement had consequences. Every decision had a cost. That was the harsh truth of war. Mastery and control were not about pride. They were about responsibility, about ensuring that each action was deliberate, measured, and necessary. For the first time that night, Ethan allowed himself to think about the future. He had proven his skill in combat, his ability to survive and protect, but the path ahead was uncertain. More missions, more danger, more decisions where failure could mean death. He understood now that discipline was eternal. It never took a break. It demanded vigilance at every moment. And yet, despite the weight of what he had endured, despite the exhaustion and the constant pressure, Ethan felt a quiet certainty. He was ready. He had survived Hell Week. He had survived the ocean. He had survived bullets and fire. And he had learned the cost of control. Tonight he would rest briefly. Tomorrow the battlefield would call again. And he would answer, calm, precise, and unbroken. Because in the world of war, survival was not given. It was earned. And Ethan Cole had earned it, again and again, at a cost measured in pain, responsibility, and silence. Dawn broke over the rugged Afghan mountains, casting a harsh golden light across the rocky valleys. Ethan Cole's team moved silently along the narrow ridges, every shadow a potential threat. Intelligence had confirmed the presence of a high-value insurgent leader in a compound just beyond the valley. This man was responsible for countless deaths, soldiers, civilians, and allies alike. For weeks, the operation had been planned with precision, but nothing could fully prepare them for what awaited. Ethan's mind ran through every detail: entry points, guard rotations, roof access, potential escape routes. He didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. He could feel his team following him, trusting his instincts without question. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but it was familiar. It was where he thrived. The compound was fortified, surrounded by tall walls and heavily patrolled. From their vantage point, Ethan could see armed men moving in patterns, watching for any intrusion. Civilians lingered near the outskirts, oblivious to the deadly game unfolding. Precision was crucial. Any mistake could end lives. The team descended into the compound under the cover of early morning shadows. Ethan's movements were fluid, silent, controlled. He had survived Hell Week, the ocean, and multiple firefights. This mission would test everything he had learned: his discipline, his focus, his ability to act when a single mistake could be fatal. They reached the inner courtyard. 2 insurgents were posted near the main building. A quick flash of hand signals, and the team moved in perfect synchronization. Ethan was at the lead, scanning each window, each doorway. His eyes locked on the target's room, where intelligence suggested the high-value insurgent had barricaded himself. Suddenly, the insurgent appeared, holding a civilian hostage, rifle raised. The situation froze everyone in place. One wrong move, a twitch, a misstep, and the hostage would die. The team's rifles were ready, fingers on triggers, but Ethan stepped forward, calm, calculating. "Don't move," he whispered under his breath. The insurgent sneered, believing the fear in his hostage gave him power. "You're too late," he growled. "No one survives this." His hands shook slightly, betraying a fraction of doubt. Ethan's body went into instinctive motion. Years of martial arts, SEAL training, and battlefield experience converged in a single sequence. He pivoted, striking with precision, grabbing the rifle mid-swing. The insurgent froze, surprised by the speed. A controlled elbow strike incapacitated him without harming the civilian. Seconds stretched into eternity. The team held their breath as Ethan moved methodically, disarming the man and securing the hostage. The insurgent fell to the ground, stunned, unable to fight further. The courtyard fell silent. Even seasoned SEALs didn't immediately speak, recognizing the mastery in Ethan's movements. He didn't celebrate, didn't exhale a sigh of relief. His breathing remained steady, his gaze calm, as if the world around him had paused, waiting for him to act again. Mac finally broke the silence, awe in his voice. How did you do that?" Ethan didn't answer. Words were irrelevant. His actions had done everything they needed to. He had neutralized the threat, preserved life, and maintained control under unimaginable pressure. The high-value target had been subdued without a single unnecessary shot fired, a feat few could claim. With the hostage safe, the team moved to secure the compound. Every movement was deliberate. Ethan remained alert, scanning windows, roofs, and corridors. He anticipated every potential attack, every escape attempt. His mind was a map of precision and efficiency, a living embodiment of control. Minutes later, the extraction team arrived. Helicopters hovered, blades kicking up dust and debris. The high-value insurgent was restrained, the hostage safe. The team boarded quickly, adrenaline still coursing, hearts racing. Ethan remained calm, silent, and ready for any last-minute threat. During the flight back to base, Mac approached him, this time with genuine respect. "You're something else, Cole. That was unbelievable. No one else could have done it like that." Ethan looked out the window at the rugged landscape below, silent. He didn't need praise. The operation had succeeded, and that was enough. Survival, control, and precision, that was all that mattered. In the days that followed, the story of Ethan's actions spread through the unit. The phrase, "no chance, rookie," had been turned on its head. The rookie who had been underestimated, mocked, and doubted had become a symbol of discipline and lethal efficiency. But Ethan didn't dwell on recognition. He trained quietly, observed carefully, and reflected on the cost of every action. The battle had been won, yet he knew the war was far from over. Every strike, every decision, every movement carried responsibility, and he had accepted that burden fully. That night, Ethan stood on the base perimeter, looking at the stars reflected in the still desert sands. The wind carried the scent of dust and gunfire, memories of the battlefield imprinted in every breath. He remembered Hell Week, the dojo, the ocean, and every firefight since. Every lesson had led him here. Strength, skill, and precision were meaningless without control. That truth resonated deeper than any medal or recognition. Ethan had become a master not just of combat but of himself. Silence, discipline, and calculated action had saved lives, and would continue to do so. As the desert night stretched on, Ethan's calm presence inspired others without a word. He was the quiet force in a world of chaos. The rookie, once doubted, had become the calm in the storm. The one who moved with certainty, struck with precision, and left the world around him silent in awe. Tomorrow, the war would continue. More missions, more danger, more life-and-death decisions awaited. But for tonight, the mission was complete. The high-value target was secured, the team alive, and the lessons of discipline proven once again. Ethan allowed himself a single, silent breath. Calm, controlled, precise. The final target had been neutralized, but the path ahead remained uncertain. That was the life of a SEAL: constant vigilance, constant preparation, constant mastery over oneself. And Ethan Cole had proven he could carry it, no matter the cost. The helicopter's blades chopped through the thin desert air as Ethan Cole and his team returned to base. Dust swirled like ghostly smoke, obscuring the mountains that had witnessed their mission, the night that had tested them to the limit. Inside the cabin, the men were silent, exhausted beyond comprehension, their adrenaline slowly ebbing into bone-deep fatigue. Ethan sat slightly apart, checking his weapons and gear for the third time, hands steady despite the long hours of combat. The others slept in brief, jerky intervals, leaning against walls or one another. Mac, sprawled across a bench, muttered something incoherent, a mixture of exhaustion and admiration. No one dared disturb Ethan. They all sensed that the quiet man had already internalized everything the mission had demanded. Silence followed him like a shadow, not the absence of sound but the presence of focus. He thought of every moment: Hell Week in the freezing surf, the dojo where Master Tanaka had drilled control into every sinew, the first firefight in Afghanistan, the insurgents subdued with precision, the hostage rescued, and the high-value target captured. Every lesson, every strike, every decision had led him here. The base perimeter glowed under floodlights as they landed. Dust and wind clung to clothing and hair, mixing with sweat and blood. The team disembarked, moving with slow care, each member attending to minor wounds or simply trying to stand. The high-value target was escorted away, secure, his threat neutralized. Officers approached, asking questions, debriefing the team. Commendations would be given, medals would be distributed, recognition would follow. Ethan acknowledged none of it. He stood quietly, listening, observing, noting how each man processed relief, fear, and pride. The work was never about accolades. It was about survival, discipline, and precision. Mac approached finally, eyes serious. "Cole, I don't know how to say this. You've done more than anyone could have imagined. You're the reason we all made it back tonight." Ethan only nodded, expression unreadable. "We survived. That's enough," he replied softly, almost under his breath. Silence, he knew, spoke louder than any words could. Later in the barracks, the team rested. Some laughed quietly, recounting moments of terror and heroism. Some simply lay still, exhausted to the bone. Ethan, however, remained awake, reflecting. He thought of the men he had fought beside, the ones he had saved, the ones who had doubted him. "No chance, rookie," they had said. Now that phrase carried a new meaning, one of awe, respect, and silent acknowledgement of mastery. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling Master Tanaka's voice. "Control is your greatest weapon. Strength without discipline is nothing. Silence speaks louder than violence." The lessons that had once seemed abstract had been forged into reality through fire, water, ice, and bullets. Every challenge had honed him into a living embodiment of that philosophy. Morning came slowly. The desert sun painted the base in harsh gold. Ethan stood at the edge of the training grounds, rifle in hand, surveying the horizon. Tomorrow would bring another mission, another test. But for now, he allowed himself to feel the rare, fleeting satisfaction of survival, of mastery over both self and chaos. The men around him began to stir, whispering about the events of the past night. The team knew the story of the Karate SEAL had spread quietly among the ranks. Rumors of the rookie who had faced impossible odds, neutralized multiple threats with precision, and saved lives without hesitation were now part of the unit's lore. Mac approached, carrying coffee and a faint grin on his bruised face. "You ever sleep?" Mac asked, half joking. Ethan shook his head. "Sleep comes when there's nothing left to control." His words were calm, detached, but each syllable carried weight. He understood the responsibility that came with skill, with power. It wasn't about glory. It was about life and survival. Later, during debrief, Ethan recounted the mission with precision, avoiding exaggeration, focusing on facts, tactical movements, and outcomes. Officers listened, nodding in approval, but they didn't fully grasp the quiet mastery that had guided every action. That was not his concern. Recognition was fleeting, control was eternal. In private, he reflected on the path that had brought him here. The freezing surf of Hell Week, the endless push-ups, the dojo's silent lessons, the first firefight, and now the high-value target secured, every moment a thread weaving him into the fabric of the SEAL's legacy. He had endured pain, fear, and doubt. He had turned mockery into respect. He had turned chaos into control. As evening fell, Ethan walked to the edge of the base once more. The desert stretched endlessly, silent except for the faint wind. He inhaled slowly, feeling the exhaustion in his body, the weight of responsibility in his mind. Victory was never permanent. Survival was never guaranteed. And yet, for this moment, he was unbroken. The rookie who had once been laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated had become something more than a soldier. He was a master of himself, a living example of discipline, precision, and control. Silence was his ally. Calm was his weapon, and action, deliberate and decisive, was his legacy. He thought of Master Tanaka's final lesson. Strength is fleeting, but control endures. Let the world rush and you will move like water. Let chaos roar and you will remain silent, unbroken. Ethan smiled faintly to himself. Every mission, every challenge, every life he touched had proven those words true. That night the base slept. Ethan remained on watch, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the horizon, not out of fear but out of vigilance. He had learned the cost of mastery. Control required constant attention, constant preparation, constant awareness. Complacency was a luxury he could not afford. In the quiet desert under a sky filled with stars, Ethan Cole stood alone yet completely present. The battles had forged him, the challenges had defined him, and the silence had revealed him. He was no longer a rookie. He was a SEAL, a warrior, a master of chaos and control. And in a world full of noise, bullets, and chaos, silence spoke loudest of all.